Hello, everybody. Thank you for the invite to talk to you all today. I was asked to talk a little on plant records and how to manage those. It's a huge subject, and I know that already you've covered large numbers of subjects around living collections as a whole. The different types of styles of gardens I can see is very varied for all the participants. So it's not really very easy for any one person to say this is what a record looks like. Rather than try and attempt that, I'm going to take some ideas to perhaps ponder on when you're thinking about the importance of records, and also tell a few stories along the way that will perhaps highlight some of the ideas that I'm going to share with you. So this is an image that I love. It's of Bodment Garden in North Wales, one of the National Trust gardens, and it's possibly one of the most complex collections of plants that we have. And I love it because it's people wandering off into the wild while they explore them. So here we have original introductions from some of the plant hunters, as well as plants bred on site. Many, many layers of design within one garden. So what I'm going to take a quick look at today is an overview of why records are so important, and also at a very high level, what you should be recording or thinking about recording and how to go about recording that. Now, as Kate said, my title is the National Curator of Living Collections, which is a title that many people share in botanic gardens, have a slightly different role. I don't look after a garden myself. I look after a team of people that help all of our head gardeners out in the 220 plus gardens that we have within the National Trust, that help them care for their collections. So I provide a series of guidance, of support services, tools, including a plant conservation centre for some of our rarest plants. And one of the aspects of my work is looking after the systems that we use and that all of our gardeners use to record our plants and to tell the stories about our plants. So just a couple of plants here to talk about. One is Stourhead, which is one of our early 18th century landscape gardens, very famous, worldwide famous. And this is a particular plant which I love, which is the Liriodendron tulipifera, the tulip tree. It sits on an island in the lake and really stands out in the autumn with this glorious colour. And Stourhead is full of early introductions of these plants that were brought in from all around the world in the early 18th century. The next example is perhaps one of our most famous plants. You can think that a record for an early introduction might include where it came from, who paid for the plant hunter to go out and find the information. There may be a letter associated with that, and some notes from where the material was gathered. But the second plant on this screen is Isaac Newton's apple tree. This is Isaac Newton's family home, his childhood home where he grew up. And Isaac Newton, for those of you who may not be aware, is a very famous British scientist. He came up with the idea of gravity, and it is said that that was prompted through watching an apple fall from this very tree. This tree, if you thought about a record for this tree, I think there are countless children, progeny around the world. There's been seed sent up to the space station, which has come back down and then been propagated, germinated and propagated and planted out. So a record, an ideal record for Newton's apple tree might run to several books and a couple of PhDs. I mean, it's very difficult to answer the question of what a great record for that single tree might look like. So let's look at why records are so important, and then we'll briefly touch on what and how to record. So records in gardens are arguably difficult and more important than the records in museums or in houses, because they constantly change. Our gardens constantly change. The plants are alive or they're dead, or they hide themselves, or they change colour, or they decide to be in flower or in fruit. So the whole process of managing our plants, it is a process. It's a journey of constant change. And in this change, we are often involved in contributing to that. We prune things, we weed things, we train them as gardeners. We sometimes try and prevent change, but with plants it's very difficult to stop it. So there's constant things happening. Every task in a garden might need a record associated with it. So when did we last prune a plant? When did we last feed it? What pests and diseases is it suffering from? Are we needing to reduce the crown tree in order to protect it? But the most important thing at the end of keeping all these records and thinking about our collections as constantly changing is people. We keep our collections arguably for often for biodiversity reasons, but a lot of the time it's to tell stories to people. And without records, we will struggle always to tell those stories, to welcome visitors in our gardens, and to celebrate and learn from our collections, our amazing collections of plants. So to give an idea about why records at the National Trust are particularly important, which hopefully you kind of see the sort of size of the thing that we're dealing with here. We have over 220 gardens and over 200 parks, and about 180 of those are registered with an organisation called Historic England as being of particular significance, both nationally and internationally. We have 650 gardeners who might want to be interested in records. And although you may be coming from small gardens, many of these gardens that we're looking after are very small, and some of them have only one gardener. So records at that garden may be of a different size and shape to records at a garden where there are more than, say, 10 gardeners working. We also have what we call rangers out looking after some of our parklands and in our countryside, and things like our heritage orchards and our ancient and veteran trees. And then we can have over 10,000 volunteers who are also helping us care for these amazing spaces and looking after our plants. So our records have to have a number of audiences, both internally, before we even start thinking about sharing that information with the broader public. We have 32,000 taxa recorded so far, and every taxonomic record is a subject of its own. Within a museum, it's unlikely that a chair is ever going to be called a table, but we all know that within the plant world, we can often find our taxonomy changing on a very regular basis. We have 220,000 additions recorded so far across all of these gardens, but I'm sure that number will increase over coming years. And then going back to the point of why records are so important, just to help all these people understand what we have within our collections. But the fact that what we're trying to do, and I think hopefully this resonates with so many of you in your own gardens, is that the whole point of them is that they are for everyone and forever. We're trying to conserve, but at the same time, there's always this sense of renewal going on, and we're introducing new ideas and new thoughts. And they are where nature, beauty, history, and people meet. Here's another classic example of nature, beauty, history, and people meeting. This is the Ankerwick Yew, which is just south of the River Thames, fairly near London. This is where it's about 2,500 years old, this yew, so there's some amazing support for nature there. It's obviously a historic tree, and in the Tudor era, this is allegedly where King Henry VIII was wooing Anne Boleyn. So King Henry VIII is one of our more famous kings, notorious for having 6 wives, and Anne Boleyn was unfortunately, sadly, the one that didn't manage to produce him a son, so had her head chopped off. But he allegedly he proposed to her under this tree. So again, it's one of those things that I think it's a very beautiful tree. It's very old. It's got a lot of history, and a particular couple used to meet there all the time. So it's a classic example of all these different dimensions of why records can be so important, because the stories that you can then produce from those records are just can be incredible, as well as, you know, botanically interesting. So why records are important? Here's some of the reasons why they are. They help us be expert custodians, to look after what we have, and to understand what we have is one of the primary things. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that on the next slide. It also helps us then, records help us monitor what we have, to find it again, to manage it, to, you know, all the pest and disease issues, the pruning, the propagation, etc., to conserve it, to restore it, to succession plan it, to comply with any legislation associated with it, whether that be for plant movement or for wild collected material. Records also help us then support broader conservation, whether that be, you know, research that we're doing ourselves in our own gardens, or as part of wider conservation initiatives, multi-garden initiatives, and to publicise those and publish that research. And also, most important, they help us share plants with people, to display them, to label them correctly, to interpret them, to tell stories about, to educate where that might be within our own objectives of our organisms. They help us reveal unknown histories. How often have we found a little gem of a piece of information in an old book that we were unaware of until we found it out, that we can then share with other people and answer queries from the public and other gardens. So records have many, many different purposes, and one of the most vital things for us all to consider when we're trying to create a record is we can't do all of this at once. So which are the aspects that we really want to focus on, that are important to our particular garden? And for me, that differs across the trust depending on the garden that I'm looking at, and I'm sure it will differ for you as an audience today. But the most important thing to come back to